Norton for Tuesday, November 13th. I'm Steve Jerzyk. Mr. Fernandez, our chairman, is not able to make it tonight, so all other planning board members are here and present. A couple brief business items to take care of while we have a few minutes before the public hearing, and we'll go through and take care of those. First of all, a welcome to Nicole Salvo, who joined the group here as administrative assistant last week, so welcome to Nicole. Thanks for joining us tonight. Paul, anything to kick us off first? If not, we'll go into bills and warrants and minutes for approval before we get started on the main topic of the agenda, which is continuation of our discussions with the Blue Star Business Park at South Leonard Street. So
I think we can go into minutes.
Okay. All right, so bear with us while we work our way through a couple of these items. In terms of bills and warrants, we do have for Mr. DiGiuseppe, sorry, for training, ads in the Sun Chronicle, and these were for
That was for the Sun Chronicle. It was for an ad for the administrative assistant from
okay.
many months ago.
So those two total $212.32, which will be more direct budget expenses. And then we have three bills for Horsley Witten for three different items: the Spears Development Project on South Washington Street, the Village Center Project, which again is being funded through the grant for the town, and then the Blue Star Business Park project. Those are three separate reimbursements: $1,084.10, $6,948.75, and $4,723.75. I do not have a total of these. I can total them up really quickly, just so we have a total we're working with. 723.75, 6,948. So the total of the Horsley Witten bills will be $12,756.60, and again, the other two items totaling $212.32 for a grand total of $12,968.92. Any questions on the bills or any further review that anybody would like? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been motioned and approved. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nays? Hearing none, the bills and warrants are approved unanimously. We'll sign off on those
Okay.
at the end. Just remind me to do that. Next, we do have two sets of minutes from the last two meetings. The first one we'll go through is the October 9th meeting minutes that came out earlier today. Did anyone have any questions, comments, edits on the October 9th minutes?
These include the comments that.
Yeah, two things. I wasn't part of the hearing, but I was in the audience. And just of note, James Friedman from Red Mill Village made a point to indicate that the arrangement between the owners of Kelly's and Red Mill Village for use of Harding Street was limited to limited hours in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays only, so it wasn't a blanket use of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the second was, I thought in approving the request, there was a modification that was made to make it clear that the application was to eliminate any reference to a change in use or expansion, and that we were
Right.
only
Yes.
limiting it to the increase in the number of parking spaces and the retaining wall.
Correct.
And that, if
Yeah.
the minutes could reflect that, I think it'd be helpful.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any objection to that if anyone else does, but that's how I'm recalling.
And
it
we
was
did
specific.
modify that
Yeah.
application.
Yeah, we were pretty specific.
We were very specific.
Right.
in the wording, yeah.
Right.
To,
Right.
to a fault almost.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other comments on the October 9th minutes?
Nope.
I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the October 9th minutes.
As noted.
With the
With the adjustments.
the
corrections.
additions from Mr. Siegel. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, thank you, Julie. All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of approving the minutes of October 9th Planning Board meeting with the additions for Mr. Siegel?
Just,
Aye?
I need
Oh.
to still be abstained from.
Okay, yeah, because you were, Mr. Siegel abstained. He recused himself from that part of the discussion. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nays? No abstentions. October 9th meeting minutes are passed. Next, we'll move on to the October 23rd meeting minutes. I was not present at that meeting, so I'll defer to my fellow board members here to comment accordingly on those minutes. I did watch the tape of the meeting, so,
Okay.
yeah.
I don't have any further comments.
The only comment I had was prior to the close of that hearing on the preliminary plan, the applicant exhibited what I believe referenced a draft concept drawing intending to address some of the issues we raised about access to the retail areas. It was my understanding that, I thought that, I'd like to indicate, I think at that time they indicated that they'd addressed that revised plan in the further permitting process in some way, and I'd like the minutes to reflect that.
Okay, does anyone have any comment or question on that?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I think there was just discussion that that wasn't the formal final
Right,
set of
Right.
plans.
It came
that
before
was-
the end of the hearing,
Yeah,
and it's sort of
yeah.
the concept which really was addressing some of our concerns, and I'd just like the
Mm-hmm.
minutes to reflect that that was exhibited to us.
Okay. Just making notes on my copy. Any other comments on the October 23rd minutes? All right, again, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved to approve the
All right,
minutes as
Mr. Griffin
amended.
has moved to approve with the amendment. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Siegel, second. Been moved and seconded. All in favor of approving the minutes with the amendment for October 23rd, 2018? Aye.
Aye.
Nays? And I will vote as present, as I was not here for that meeting. So the minutes will pass approved by 4 votes to 0. All right. And that kind of takes care of the business items, and I know we're just a few minutes past 7:20, so we will once again open the public hearing on the Blue Star Business Park. I know we have representatives from Condyne. Once again, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. We also have representatives from Horsley Witten, and I believe some other folks that we'll work our way through as the evening goes on. Several topics that we'll discuss through this evening. I'll have Paul probably kick us off with a few comments, and then ask the gentleman from Condyne to briefly make some statements in regards to the special permit and where they're at in their process. And then we'll ask the folks from Horsley Witten to come forward and start our discussion of some of the peer review comments that came up upon that peer review in terms of traffic, wetlands, drainage, land use, things along those lines. So we'll, work our way through these, certainly open it up for questions along the way. And it looks like we have a few folks from the town here, residents, that may have comments throughout the proceedings as well, and we'll do our best to give that opportunity, and hopefully it'll be a productive evening. So with that, Paul, would you like to kick us off?
Great, well, thank you. And I just want to say a few words, but primarily just go over, the structure for tonight, because obviously we have, as you saw from the written comments, there's a lot here. So we want to just have a structured presentation. So I'd like to go through that. But of course, tonight we're here to focus on the site plans and special permit applications for Blue Star Business Park for lots 1 through 5. As you know, we entered into a peer review contract with Horsley Witten to help us with different aspects of the review, and I won't go over all of those again, but they're here tonight to present their first review of the permits to you tonight. In addition to you all receiving it, Condyne received the comments as well, and they've started doing a lot of work into responding to that. So for tonight's meeting, we've worked in collaboration with the consultants. The order we'd like to go through with you all is first to have Francisco Levera from McMahon Transportation to talk about traffic. Then, I should say, after each presentation, we want to give Condyne an opportunity to provide responses that they have for that. But again, during the presentation, you all are certainly welcome to ask questions and have a good conversation. So following Francisco, we'll have Amy Ball with Horsley Witten to talk about the wetlands aspects of it, then followed by Janet Bernardo, also with Horsley Witten, to talk about drainage. And then I'll present the town's comments, primarily regarding land use and transportation. I also want to just point out our comments. This is an important project to the town, and our comments are really meant to be, in a way, make sure that the project meets state and our local requirements and get a great project. And so we're doing this with the thought that we're trying to help make this happen. So with this, and I know they're going to talk about the application, just a couple of historical aspects, particularly for the public. There were some previous actions, as you know, back at the town meeting in May of 2017. This property was rezoned from residential 80 to industrial. October 17th, the Zoning Board of Appeals approved a variance request for 3 of the properties, lots 1, 2, and 3, to reduce the minimum lot size requirement from 80,000 square feet to 45,000. As you know, this property is within the Zone 2 of the Drinking Water Protection Zone. So 80,000 square feet is the minimum through our bylaws, but the Zoning Board of Appeals approved that change to 45,000, which is the minimum standard for the industrial zoning district. And then finally, your last meeting, October 23rd, you all approved the preliminary subdivision for Blue Star. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Condyne to start their presentation.
Thank you. I'm Jeff O'Neill, president of Condyne. With me is Don O'Neill, principal and partner of Condyne as well. Obviously, you know Mark Dibb, our engineer, project engineer, heads up CEG Engineering, and Susan Bernstein, counsel of law, representing Condyne and also Blue Star. So thank you, Paul and the board. What we'd like to do is give you a brief overview of the park. So I know we're here for the certain filings, but some people may have not seen the overall elements and what we're trying to do, and for the town of Norton as well in the development. So, well, let's see if we can get this started. Okay. The total land area off of 123 and 495 is approximately 190 acres, as you can see, south of Leonard and the back piece, which is the rear of Leonard. Our goal is to develop this into 2 phases, which of phase 1 will be buildings 1 through 5, and then eventually building 7, and then the buildings at the rear of the site will be constructed at a later date. In total, again, Paul reiterated, we've rezoned the land into industrial. That's been approved, and in that process, we're looking at a total of 887,000 square feet plus or minus. Retail is about 41. The warehouse and fulfillment is roughly 593, and industrial flex is 251. So it gives you a broad range of phase 1 and 2 totality. And looking at permitting, we're through the ENF, we're through the EIR, and we're in front of both Planning Board and Conservation. On approval of permits schedule-wise, big picture, we're looking at roughly about a 24 to 36-month build-out from completion of permits. If you take a look at the master plan for the total park, looking at it, again, buildings 1 through 3 of the retail, accessory use on the front, Buildings 4, 5, and 7 are our high bay fulfillment centers, constructing of 125,258 and 130,000 square feet. And then buildings 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 at the rear of the site are a Phase 2, which is combined of flex industrial and also some high bay distribution. Going through, these are the renderings for the projects of what the samples will look like. As you can see, bottom right, we're looking at roughly the retail accessory use. The Acme Printing Company, or the Acme Company, is the first high bay distribution you'd see at the entryway, and then also some of the other entrances. Give you a bigger picture, this is what the large building will look like, which is Building 5, the 258,000 square feet. This has the capability to be subdivided to 5 tenants, and then you can get a look of what the 2 retail buildings, Buildings 1 and 2, would look like at the entrance to the park. And then this is some of the flex product that would be going at the rear of the site in the smaller, lower ceiling facilities in the Phase 2 section. So, big picture, what are we seeing now? In our industrial real estate, we're seeing the e-commerce take over everything. So if you take a look at some of the stats down at the bottom, our Class A vacancy in the southeastern Mass market is 5.4%, 8.3% in quarter 4 of 16. All retail is shopped online, and coming forward, we're projecting 15 to 20% by 2020. This will give you a sample of some of the major tenants that have taken up a bulk of the space in all of eastern Massachusetts. So FedEx, UPS, Amazon, and Wayfair are kind of the category killers right now. Total, again, 112 million square feet is our total industrial inventory mass. 54 is in the southern market, and then our Class A space, again, down below is 5.4%, which is 32.2 million square feet. And we classify that by the age and the height of the buildings for modern high bay. Tenants that are all looking at these facilities, and you're going to see quite a few names: Amazon, Ryder, Joffran, Key, Wayfair, Dealer Tire, Harbar, Maintenance Supply, Harpac, and Alnylam. All of these tenants are in the market looking for additional space in southeastern Mass. Coming through, we did an initial sewer analysis at the outset. By connecting to the sewer, one of our mitigations, we are preventing flow further into the ground. You can see as compared to Title V. So we are enhancing the sewer system that we're putting in for the use of the park. This will give you a sense briefly of some of the mitigation efforts that we're doing. So improving the intersection at the front door with a traffic signal, sidewalks, entryway signage. The bottom left will give you an example of where the sewer is coming through from Phase 2 of the park all the way through Phase 1 down Leonard and across the highway to the wastewater treatment center. And then to the right, you'll see some of the site plans, mitigation, protecting the site, and the screened natural landscaping as well, including sidewalks. Some of the advantages of the park that we're trying to accommodate, obviously, industrial, like we're working in Norton Commerce Center, is not as strenuous on the essential services of the town. You can see we're potentially going to generate anywhere from $800,000 to $1.5 million in new taxes to the town. That is pretty a good example of what we're achieving up in the Norton Commerce Center now as well. All tenants' personal property tax ends up getting directed to the town of Norton. Excise tax for any vehicles that are garaged or stored get it directed to Norton. We're expecting 300 to 500 new full-time jobs at this location, and that's probably just in Phase 1 and potentially part of Phase 2. And then we're providing additional benefit to construction workers in the area, and then enhancing the local economy through the tenants that we bring in. So we think there's a lot of benefits. I think a good example is how we performed up at Norton Commerce Center, bringing in all the new tenants to the town of Norton. Take a look at, quickly, a snapshot of what we're spending and what capital costs are coming to the town of Norton. You know, land acquisition, we're probably around just under $7 million. We have Phase 1 infrastructure and Phase 1 sewer and water, comprised of about $2.9 million. And then looking to the right, total project cost, you can see infrastructure. We're spending about $11.7 million to get this development into the town. In addition, we've already exceeded our construction costs, so we're probably in the range of about $75 million right now, and plus our soft costs, we're exceeding roughly about $92 million for the whole development. So just give you a snapshot of the investment that's coming in. So here's the initial building plan, which we'll go through in a little bit more detail. So buildings 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then here's the color plan, just to show you our concentration of what we're doing tonight. And here's the site permits that we're seeking for buildings 1 through 5. So,
Again, Mark Dibb with Condyne Engineering Group. Yes, so these special permit requests are listed on the applications. Building 5, for instance, I think has all 4 of these. Building 1 is not within the wetland protection district, so that is not listed, but each application has the applicable special permit that we need. Any building over 10,000 square feet, any use that will render impervious more than 15% or 2,500 square feet in the water protection district, any building or structure within the wetland protection district. I'm just going to add that is the definition of the wetland protection district in this area is the elevations below elevation 70, and we're actually not really doing any work below elevation 70, but there's portions of parts of the parcels that meet that criteria, so we have added that special permit request. And also, particularly Building 5, a special permit for the use in the floodplain. We also submitted a special permit request for the 2 common driveways. We had that discussion as well. So that is particularly why we're here. Tonight technically is the first abutter notified hearing with the planning board for this project. That's why we felt we wanted to give that presentation up front, because we've had a number of conversations prior, but we wanted to cover all the bases. So that's our initial presentation.
Okay.
All right, very good. Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate the recap. Any initial questions from the board on that? I don't think anything new in any of that information. So let's jump in. Do you want to have folks from Francisco?
Francisco?
Okay,
Would you
so-
like to come up and start? And Francisco's with McMahon Transportation.
McMahon
and
Transportation?
He wrote the review on traffic that's in your packet.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. Good evening,
Yeah,
board.
thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for the record, my name is Francisco Lovera, professional engineer from McMahon Associates, which is a firm that is located in an office very close to Taunton, in Taunton, very close to the town. We performed a review of the documentation that was provided by the applicant to confirm that the traffic analysis and the mitigation that was presented in the reports met the generally accepted engineering practices for this kind of reports. In general, the report meets those guidelines. There were a few items that we found that could be addressed and should be addressed, in our opinion, and I'll go over the description of all of them. The reports that were included for the DEIR and the FEIR, they generally include the intersections that were noted by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation through the MIPA process. However, we identified one of the intersections that was not included in the list noted by Mass DOT, the intersection of Main Street and Bird Street. Was not included in the analysis. Since Bird Street can provide access to the site through Plain Street in the back, we feel that the intersection should be included in the analysis. There may be some traffic that is coming from the eastern area that would try to access the site through the back instead of trying to drive continuously on Main Street and access through Leonard Street. So we feel that that intersection should be included in the report and in the analysis that was provided. There was an analysis provided, additional counts and additional analysis for a midday Saturday peak hour to account for commercial and for commercial area, commercial activity that takes place during the weekend. However, we were not able to find that information on the documents, and it may be something that it was missed, but it's just part of the documentation that should be provided on the report. As part of the report, there were some peak hours that were identified throughout the network and the different intersections, and the peak hours, which is when the traffic volumes are the highest at that intersection. They vary a little bit throughout the roadway network, but they are within a half an hour, both during the AM and the PM. When that difference is more significant than that small window, it's typically requested to provide a peak hour for the whole network, but in this case, is not required, and the applicant did not need to do that. Also, the time where the counts were obtained between May, June, September, and October. Some of the counts were obtained by the applicant, and some of the other counts were used from the design exception report that VHB, as a consultant for Mass DOT, has developed for improvements on the interchange. All the counts, when you compare them to a counting station nearby, counts on those months tend to be higher than the average, and the applicant did not do a seasonal adjustment, which is fine. You want to be providing a more conservative analysis, but it would be a good idea that the reports include that language, just to be to document that the analysis is presented in a conservative analysis, and there is a backup on why that is the case. In going over the safety analysis, the applicant provided some crash rates, but we were not able to find the backup for the crash rates as they were developed. There is a standard sheets that Mass DOT has developed for these purposes, so we request that the applicant provides the backup. And in general, the results they show that there is not a significant safety concern in any of the intersections that were analyzed, which is a good thing. Normally, you want to see if there is something significant or a higher incidence of crashes, that the additional traffic could enhance those possibilities of crashes. So in those situations, you want to have the applicant to provide additional measures to mitigate those crashes, but there is not a significant, at least from the data that was provided. Once the backup is submitted, then we will be able to confirm that that is the case. The applicant, as part of the MEPA process, developed the FEIR, which requested to include Saturday counts. When the applicant projected the traffic counts to the future, they use the same future bill scenario, which is accurate, but one thing that was a little bit missed is that the projection was done for only 6 years instead of 7, and in Massachusetts, you have to project the volumes in 7 years. So even though the volumes would be for a 2025 scenario, it's a standard practice that those volumes in the existing roadway network are extended and are projected for a 7-year period. The applicant identified the two permitted under construction projects, and while there may not be a change or an addition of new trips to the roadway network, some of those may change some of the travel patterns that exist in roadway network. So we request that the applicant includes a narrative on or an analysis, if that is the case, of how that would affect the existing traffic. The applicant also identified, as it was mentioned earlier, that there are some improvements provided at the intersection at Leonard Street and Main Street, and the analysis included the improvements that are proposed by Mass DOT at the interchange, the ramps of 495 and Main Street. However, it was unclear in the analysis if the way that the phasing was analyzed, if that is consistent with the proposed improvements by Mass DOT. So we're requesting the applicant to confirm that that is the case, and if it is not the case, then revise the analysis. But it may be just a matter of providing the backup documentation for this. Regarding the trip generation and distribution, between the DEIR and the FEIR, there was a change in the number of square feet that were proposed in different types of development between the general office building, warehousing, and shopping center. And it was assumed that the expected trip generation would be lower, but when we run an analysis, we actually realized that some of the traffic, the trips that are generated by the revised site configuration would actually result in a higher number of trips. So we are requesting for the client, for the applicant to revise their analysis as well. The other concern that we found regarding the trip generation is that the mixed use was assumed that it would be the flex space. The flex space would be office space, but when you start looking into other types of site development, that could be a commercial development that takes place in that area, those land uses tend to generate a little bit more traffic. So it might be a good idea for the applicant to have a sensitive analysis, assuming other types of potential land use development for the flex space. When you are developing a site like this that has multi-use, you can assume that some of the existing traffic in the roadway network is already is going to be using some of the commercial space. They're already in their way home or their way to work, and they may stop to do some of the businesses. So standard practice allows you to reduce some of the impacts on the roadway network from for the traffic that would be generated by that site, and the applicant actually use a more conservative percentage of those trips on the roadway network that are going to be using potentially using the commercial development. So we are in agreement with that. They are actually a little bit conservative in that sense. The applicant also assumed that for the industrial development, the trucks would follow whatever is the closest access from 495, which is a very good assumption, and it is what the trucks would be expected to do. But in terms of the office, the trip distribution was based on the adjacent roadway network travel patterns, and in this case, it's typically used. It's more typical to use a census data work to home information that is available to identify where people may be coming to work at this site for the office space. So we request that the applicant revise that trip distribution to better identify where the people may be coming from. The FEIR process requested the applicant to do, as I mentioned before, additional analysis to intersections, but the analysis was constrained to the 495 Rams as well as Leonard Street. We feel that due to the nature of the businesses that exist on the north side of 495 along Main Street, that is more commercial, businesses that are further south, or the land use that exists further south on Main Street towards downtown is not so commercial. So we feel that the applicant should provide an analysis of a Saturday travel patterns on the northern side of Main Street, including Leonard and all the way up to Eastern intersection. The applicant used also two different software versions of capacity analysis, version 9 for DEIR and version 10 for the FEIR. There were some different consistency upgrades that were included in the update of those versions, so we request that the applicant provides a consistent analysis on the two versions. Mm-hmm. The applicant also identified the peak hour factor and the heavy vehicle percentages. when you are doing a capacity analysis of an intersection or roadway network, the more heavy vehicles that you have, the lower capacity that you can provide in the roadway network. And that was correctly done and applied when the applicant was doing the existing conditions analysis. But once the new traffic is added, which is expected to be several trucks due to the nature of the development, those peak hour, those heavy vehicle percentages were not updated, which would decrease some of the capacity that the intersections will be expected to operate. So we request that the applicant updates the analysis accordingly. One concern that we have regarding the operation of Leonard Street intersection, actually the Main Street approach, the northbound approach to Leonard Street, is that the projected queue from Leonard, on Main Street from Leonard, from the stop bar would be expected to extend to the ramps. So we are asking the applicant to review the analysis and see if there is additional mitigation that could be provided in instances like this. An intersection that is so close to an interchange could be a coordination with the two ramps that are there. It could be hardwired, or it could also be with non-invasive. You can put a GPS clock to make sure that the intersections are consistently moving, or you can also go as far as having a queue detector to prevent any traffic that is queuing all the way to the ramps, that queue does not extend into the interstate. There was a determination that some language in the reports that the intersection at Leonard and Main Street meets several warrants to install a signal, and we feel that that would be the case. But it would be appropriate for the applicant to provide the backup for that analysis, the backup of the warrant analysis that was performed for that intersection. That's part of the analysis when the traffic signal was considered at this location. There was also a consideration for a roundabout, which didn't work. But when the signal was analyzed, there were some yellow and red intervals that were assumed. We would like the applicant to provide some backup of why, how those numbers were developed, because there are specific guidelines on Mass DOT based on the speed of the approaches or expected speed of the roadways, of the vehicles that are operating on the roadways. There is some inconsistency, and it could be because the phase 1 and phase 2 portions of the project, the applicant is mentioned there will be 2 driveways on Leonard Street. When you look at the overall plan, the number of driveways is actually 4, so just a minor thing that could be updated on the report. Regarding the internal circulation, the applicant is mentioning the access and all the driveways that are existing, that are proposed on the side, will not have an issue, will not create an issue for vehicles to access it, but we would request from the applicant to provide a plan that shows the wheel path for the different design vehicles. At a minimum, the fire trucks should be depicted in a way that they can access the sites without any issues. And in the warehouses, there are some areas that are identified for tractor trailers, so we would like to have the applicant provide those drawings where a tractor trailer would be able to enter the site and maneuver inside this, within the site without any problems. We feel that would be the case, but it would be a good practice to provide that as a backup of that statement. And yeah, one thing that I mentioned before, we looked into the documentation that was provided regarding the site distance and the operating speeds for the driveways on the side that would be right in and right out on Main Street, and they meet the stop inside distance. Since the signal is proposed on Leonard Street, sometimes it's a good idea to increase the capacity of the other approach to allow right turns on red to be permitted. But in order to do that, we request that the applicant provides backup to make sure that the side distance is available for a vehicle to make that right turn.
That was into the driveway?
No, we are
Or is
right
that at
turn.
Leonard Street you're talking?
From Leonard Street, making a right turn.
Leonard
when-
Street making a right, okay.
Yeah, when the vehicles on Main Street have a green light, even they have a gap, they should be able to, they could be able to make a turn. So that's in general the different points that we found on the reports. If the board has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the overview. I'll ask the board if there's any initial questions.
I guess a lot of, I think, what you've laid out here is asking for backup and clarification on modeling and things like that. Based on the information that you have now, I think in terms of internal circulation, where do you see the most potential for congestion in an internal circulation perspective? Or is that not something that's been studied in depth at this point yet?
The way that the driveways are provided, they are actually separated into different uses and entrances. We do not foresee there is not a point that is blatantly wrong that we can identify at this point. The fact that there's a driveway identified on Main Street and there is a different driveway identified on Leonard Street for the front properties, that is separating the traffic that will be entering the warehouse. The tractor trailers may be able to enter through that second driveway, and I assume that it's safe to assume that the applicant will make sure that all the trucks follow that route instead of trying to go internally. It's really not their place. But other than that, we couldn't identify any laden locations where there could be a heavy congestion, and it all depends on the different tenants that are coming to the site. If you happen to have a really popular fast food place or sit-down restaurant, then no matter what the design you're going to have a lot of traffic. And I'm sure that that's probably what the applicant is looking for, some development, some tenant that will have a high demand.
Have you evaluated cars coming down south on 123, trying to enter into, would have to take a left-hand turn onto Leonard Street, trying to access Building 3, the path they would need to take? Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah. If the vehicle is on Main Street coming from the eastern area,
Yeah.
in order for a vehicle to make a bad left turn, the way that the analysis has been identified, it would be a protected left turn only, meaning that if you want to make that left turn, you're not going to have anybody in front of you in conflict with you, which is a safer type of operation. It tends to decrease the capacity of the approach, but they shouldn't have any problem. And since all the other traffic has been stopped, there would not be a conflict with them. So if someone is making a left turn and then entering on the first driveway to Land 3, we don't see a...
That first driveway is proposed to be shared with an industrial use as well as the retail use. Now, if you just track where that car would go if it was going to Building 3,
Yes.
the path it would take?
Yeah, the vehicle would be entering through here, and then they would come into those businesses. And
Built to Building 3.
if they're coming to Building 3,
They can't get there by there, that way.
The lower building.
This is the building
the
here, so.
they would have to go around.
Is that a preferred method of accessing a building?
No, they have access coming down here.
They would have access for trucks in this area.
Well, that's the,
Yeah, trucks in this area. It is definitely a little convoluted. It will be a lot of maneuvers that they have to take, but
Have you seen that kind of sharing of space with an industrial use and a retail use, with trucks and cars accessing that same driveway?
You have a lot of concern when when the vehicles have the same peak hour. Normally, what I'm trying to say, the industrial use may not have necessarily overlap when people are coming to use the retail use. Retail use, you generally are shopping or doing businesses, not early in the morning, sometimes in the middle of the day, or in the afternoon, on the way home, or in Saturday. The industrial use would have a different type of peak hour.
What would be the dimension of the road that was servicing both an industrial warehouse and retail area, 67,000, 47,000 square feet? They only have 30 feet drive. Right now, that plan is always showing 30 feet. Is that adequate for industrial as well as retail use?
Yeah, I mean, typically you have a 12-foot lane for a vehicle. That's how wide the lanes are on the freeway.
Okay.
And if there is some concern about trucks or cars entering at the same time, it would be a good idea for the applicant to provide the design vehicle entering and see where there will be a conflict. But we don't see a problem with that.
Because you've brought this issue up before, and Building Inspector Chris Carmichael and I went to a few sites around town to look at this issue, because as you know, in our code, in the bylaws, the industrial developments are supposed to have 50-foot wide driveway for two-lane traffic. We did approve Condyne's development on Commerce Way with 30 feet, but we've also found that other projects were larger, that they were 40, 45 feet, 50 feet wide. And the issue that we're still working with, and we'll continue to work with Condyne, is what will be the appropriate width? At this point, Mr. Carmichael and I have a concern, particularly with that driveway that shares both retail and truck traffic, to see, is 30 feet sufficient? Our concern is that it isn't, but we have to work with the applicant to see if that should be a sufficient number. So that is an issue we've raised. So we will work with Condyne to figure out how to address that for both of those driveways.
All right, because right now, that driveway off of 123, both of them have access for truck access. Is that
Well,
correct?
off of Leonard.
No, off of 123. That driveway, they're proposing for having a common driveway to include off of 123?
Right, well, they're also, gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you all are going to have no truck traffic signs posted. And,
Yeah, off that entrance from 123.
and there's, I guess when it's my turn, I can talk about, I think, what a potential win-win solution for that.
Okay, yeah. I
Will be-
thought we were going to see another proposal that was referenced at the preliminary planning board session, but that's still what we have. That's why I'm raising it. The other question I had is, right now, there's a right-hand turn on the 123 entrance to the 123 between the two buildings. As it enters into 123,
Somebody
there's a
exiting
right-hand
right.
turn lane so that someone going and not making a right-hand turn would have to take a wider turn out. Is that correct?
Because the right-hand lane on 123 is a right turn only into the park. So somebody exiting the park from that drive
No.
down,
No, coming out in between,
they'd have to cross that right turn only lane to get out if they weren't.
if they're not turning
Going on a
right
merry-go-round.
onto Leonard Street, yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I definitely do not see a concern, because if someone wants to go in that direction, they have the ability to get out through Leonard and use the signal to be able to exit the side. There may be an opportunity for someone to just try to cross that lane and have that conflict, but realistically, when you have a side like that, if someone is not comfortable making that movement, they will not do it. But they do have another option to make that. In a similar situation, when you're going to get gas or get a coffee in the morning, if you don't feel comfortable going to a side, you're definitely going to go to another side and entering and exiting.
Someone turning out, okay.
And there is a decent length there of,
Well, do we know the extent, there's going to be a light at Leonard Street and 123. There's also going to be a light at 495. Do we have any information from their traffic data that they provided to give us an idea of, during the peak hours in the AM, or particularly more in the PM, of what kind of car queue would be on either end of that light?
Very
Yeah.
detailed, yes.
Yeah, it was.
Do we know?
in
what-
all the traffic
Could someone
reports that
tell
have
us
been
what that would be?
Yeah, no, it was provided, and the one concern that we realized was the potential queue that would be extending from this stop bar all the way to the other signal. So we want the applicant to evaluate if additional measures should be provided here. Should they provide 2 lanes and the right turn lane, or something else? Just because the queue extending all the way to the off ramps is not a
Is
desirable
that the PM
situation.
hours?
It's during I believe it is during PM. Let me confirm.
So that would back up, so then, and then what would be the queue coming out of out of Leonard Street? Do you know how many cars would be backed up from Leonard Street?
I don't have that information on my head.
Is
I
that in
don't
the
have
traffic
on the
It's in
report in
the
front of me.
detailed traffic report, yes.
And do we know how many cars that would be at any
No,
given
I don't
time?
have that on top of my head, but
And I believe that information was included in the Dropbox folder. It was the traffic analysis that was done as part of the
I know.
MEPA process.
It's kind of technical, and I'm.
It's very.
I'm not trying to understand it, I'm trying to ask, that's what I'm trying to ask.
Paul, we'd like to go through the comments and respond. I think that was the plan.
Yeah. If, at this point, given there's been a couple of questions asked, yeah, let's have the gentleman from Condyne do some replies and provide any other additional information.
In addition, just so everyone knows, has everyone been to Norton Commerce Center at all? Has everyone driven through the park?
I've been through it many times.
So everyone's been up there. That roadway is 30 feet wide, and it's servicing 1.3 million square feet of trucks, employees, everyone coming out of that facility. That probably has over 1,000, 1,500 employees. It's 30 feet, pave to pave. So just give a semblance of the size of the roadway that we're looking at here with a lot less trip generation.
Speed
let's-
as well. This is a common driveway. You'd have a speed of 5 miles per hour, 10 miles per hour. Commerce Way is 30 miles per hour too. Just wanted to note that. I'll go through. I wanted to just note one thing before I go through these timing. These plans, the paperwork, the applications were, and the plans that ultimately made it to Horsley and Witten to review were submitted back in the beginning of September. So we have presented alternatives for that maneuvering through there, and they're just not, we couldn't, the plans that were submitted with the application did not have that on that yet. So we still anticipate that change. We can show that exhibit again, where we're making much better access through the property. And I think you noted even in the minutes that we presented that at that time, but it's just not on this peer review set. It's just timing. We submitted that set. It took a month to get the proposal. It took another month to do the peer review. That's just the way it worked out. We still are proposing that change. We can go through that if you'd like. So I'll go through these comments. The initial request to study the intersection at 123 and Burt Street, we did review the analysis, the ITE trip generation at that area, and it's anticipated about at the peak PM time that north and southbound traffic in that area is about 100 trips per hour, or less than 2 per minute. We'd request that we do not need to do that additional study at Burt Street, but again, that's up to the planning board's discretion. And I think another part of the comment was someone using Burt Street to access the property. I know I wouldn't go over a mile through a residential area to access the industrial park versus a straight few hundred feet down to a traffic light to access, but we will leave that up to the board on that item. The next comment, we were more than happy to provide the Saturday counts that they could not find in the report. We can also address the seasonal adjustments. A lot of these are just, like you mentioned, providing the backup. The safety analysis crash data, we can provide that backup as well. The Saturday counts extending out to 2025, we can do that. They were performed in early 2018, I believe, and our consultant just kept it consistent, addressing it to 2024, but we can provide it out to 2025. We will look at the Wheaton College trip pattern, traffic patterns. We can look into that and provide information on that. The next comment, we can continue to address that as well. There's no,
What was that one, Mark? I'm sorry.
The pedestrian phases of the intersections were based off the 75% Mass DOT drawings. 100% drawings have just been released, so they
Okay.
will be updated and compared.
we anticipate to be consistent on that with those improvement plans. We will address these two trip generation comments regarding the flex use and the change of space through the DEIR and FEIR comments. So that's trip generation comment 1. The internal capture rates, we will look into that and provide additional information on that as well, as providing additional information on the journey to work data for the park. Provide that. The traffic analysis, the Saturday midday capacity analysis. Again, this is Mass DOT has looked at this 2 times. Both the traffic studies we did for the DEIR and the additional information for the FEIR, were thoroughly reviewed by Mass DOT as well. The opportunity to be reviewed by the town. We don't anticipate issues with the Saturday midday capacity and are requesting not to do that additional studies. Again, it's up to the board's discretion on that.
As part of the FEIR and the traffic study, we reviewed 10 intersections with all the detailed traffic analysis in the queues. And the Easton intersection up where Target and the stores are was not a request by them. It was not part of that process. So we feel at this point, through Mass DOT and the standards that they're requiring, that we shouldn't be dragged up there to review the Easton intersection.
We will coordinate the synchro versions and provide information on that. We will provide information on the heavy traffic as requested. We will continue to examine mitigation measures for that queue length on 123. We definitely can provide the traffic signal warrant analysis as requested. We can evaluate the site distance as requested. We can coordinate the number of driveways in the report as requested as well. We will also provide the auto turn analysis for both emergency vehicles and the tractor trailer vehicles, as well as we'll provide copies of the interval worksheets. We have those and we can provide those to the consultant as well. Those are our response. Again, I do have that exhibit of the potential change to that drive-through if we want to take one more look at that. Or I can just provide it to the consultant along with the follow-up information.
Yeah, I mean, definitely provide that information as well to McMahon. So they have that and are aware of that, proposed recommendation.
Good.
So the two items, I believe, that you were questioning the need for was the study of the intersection at 123 and Birch Street, as well as the further north intersection reviews. All the rest I had
Saturday.
as no issues and okay to provide. Any thoughts or comments from the board on either of those two requests?
Is there, aside from people going to the industrial park using Burke Street, is there not an issue of people leaving Burke Street and trying to enter into 123 in terms of the timing? I know that on Newland Street, I believe at a certain point in time, there was a level of service reflected as being F for, I think it was the PM peak times. So might not that similarly affect that, them accessing Burke Street in terms of how they would access that, given the traffic running down 123?
Yeah, we will not know until the analysis is performed.
Okay.
How far up is Birch Street?
You can see
From-
it on the map here.
Yeah.
It's Burt, B-U-R-T.
basically
Yeah,
next-
Burt, yeah. B-U-
Next
S-T.
right,
Sorry.
the next street up.
Yeah, I was just, I know it's the next street up. I was just
Yeah,
curious how
right.
far that distance was.
A few hundred feet.
It's
No,
It's
not
it's
that
only a
far.
couple hundred feet.
Yeah, I just was curious on what that distance was in relation to the Leonard Street intersection.
But it's certainly not a direct path into the park.
No, I mean, you'd have to go down through and
Yeah.
work your way around, yeah, Plain Street, you know,
But the
come
issue
back
is
out.
not the park, it's traffic impacted by the park in terms of an entrance into that roadway. Newland Street at a point in time has a level of service of F. And I think there are a couple of other areas that might have the same thing. One other question, maybe you can help me with. Are you aware of any studies dealing with the impact of traffic on an elderly population?
Yeah, there have been studies where either for the development of our assisted living community or where a proposed development is nearby one of the existing living communities sites. In general, they don't have a significant impact because older populations, they tend to choose their driving when it's more convenient. So if the peak hour, somewhere between 6 and 9 a.m., it's very heavy and they don't have an opportunity to get in and out of a development easier, they would choose a different time. And similarly, they try to avoid the afternoon peak hours. So it's not, we do not see a significant impact on that in that type. If you are talking about an urban area where there's a lot of people walking, there may be a different kind of impact on that type of development.
Okay.
From a procedural standpoint, this review is covering the entire park, not just the Phase 1, it includes Phase 2 as well.
Correct.
Okay.
Is the analysis predicated on the light at 495 as well? Or is this standalone, just this light?
No, the analysis that it was provided includes the proposed signals on the interchange.
On both locations?
Yes. Yep.
Right.
As well as the proposed signal on Washington Street. Yeah, all of that is being included, so that was well done.
Mark and Jeff, just to understand from a timeline standpoint, in terms of providing all the additional information to this, what's the ask on that from your end?
I mean, that's why I request a determination just on these two additional studies. You know, basically, we're asking the board to say, yes, you need to do that tonight, or no, you don't need to do that tonight, so we can proceed with that. Then overall, to address all the issues, you know, I don't even know if you have a second meeting in November with the upcoming
We
holidays.
we
but,
do.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, the week after Thanksgiving, I would,
I believe it's on the
Yeah.
calendar, yeah.
Yeah, we have the 27th.
27.
yeah.
you know, we're gonna do everything we can to reply by then. You know, if we're not ready, we'll continue. If we are, we'll be here. But,
Yeah. And in terms of the additional study for Birch Street, how long would that take to?
It could take a couple weeks to get all that put together.
Okay.
And then longer for the Saturday work of, I mean, it's stating all the intersections from, I think it says all the intersections up to that final one at Target on Saturday.
Well, realistically, the one at Target would not be included because it's not on the town's jurisdiction. It would be only Burt and Newland.
So up to that one.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, at the intersection of Target at 106 and 123, that's outside of the jurisdiction, so there is no
Yeah.
request for us to provide that. It would be
Right.
just at Burt and Newland Street, because Leonard is already included.
All right, any other thoughts from?
You said that you were going to adopt some other modifications to the plan. When would we have that, and is that something that the traffic engineers would have to take a look at?
Yeah, that would be part of a resubmittal based on the comments, and they basically re-review everything. We'd itemize the change, we'd provide a detailed response to comments, as well as something like that isn't particularly in the comment list, so we'd identify that as a plan change as well. And then they have the opportunity to review all that information again, and, you know, a follow-up review is submitted from them. And just using Google, it's about a mile from Burt Street to the intersection of Leonard, and exactly it came up like .93 miles.
Good job, Peter.
Nailed it.
And if you don't recall, that's fine. But from a queuing perspective to the north at that light, what was there?
I don't recall on the
Yeah.
top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just
the
to
only
understand
one-
how far that, may reach.
Yeah, the only one where we saw a concern on the expected queues was that
Yeah.
in the northbound direction, the PM.
Okay, any concerns with the requests from Condyne?
Well, what are they requesting, the waiver of the Burke Street?
Requesting not to provide a additional traffic study at Birch Street, as well as the additional Saturday midday analysis for intersections north of the I-495 ramps.
North of the 400? Yeah,
Which all this would be, north of
My
495.
own sense, given the bulk of this development is going to be warehouse use, I'm not as concerned with the Saturday
Yeah,
use of it. I think more importantly is the peak hours during the day. I think that will be, the more big focus will be through the retail section, and it's not that big. So I wouldn't be that concerned about it. But I would like, I don't know offhand and recall the traffic flow, especially at PM, heading down 123. Let's don't forget you got Avalon, I mean, that's very busy, and they're adding to it. I don't know by what degree. I know they were adding it to a degree by Newland Street, it became It was a level F and it was becoming worse. And I don't know, that would mean the people coming out of Burke Street have a problem with level of service. And that's what I have no sense of, and I think that's what they're looking at. Rather than the possibility of going through Burke Street to get to Leonard Street, I think that's a remote possibility of it, but I would be concerned, for the same reason they took Newland Street to evaluate the traffic pattern and the delay coming out of that street. I think would be fair to the people on Burke Street, and I don't know how many people there are there. There are more people on Newland Street, obviously, than on coming off of Burke Street. That's mostly residential.
And I do have those numbers. At the peak daily hour, peak hour, we have 68, the project is generating 68 trips going north and 33 trips going south. And again, that's less than 2 trips generated by Blue Star Business Park going past Burt Street in a minute. Less than 2 trips in a minute. So that's, that's in either direction. Or
That's
total.
PM?
PM.
That was peak time?
Peak.
Peak PM, so that's right within the traffic study. That those are, to answer this question, we particularly pulled out that data, and that's what it was analyzed as.
Okay. Just real quick, I'll open it. Any questions from anyone in the public audience here? All right, hearing none. Any other comments on this? From my perspective, I'm comfortable with the agreement of Condyne to provide all the backup data and additional information requested. I'm okay with waiving Bird Street and the Saturday midday additional analyses. If anyone has any objections, to that, speaking for myself, I'm comfortable with waiving those too.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think a lot of the analysis that they've done, to Francisco's point, has been conservative in nature, so I appreciate that. So I think those are good points made, and I would agree with you, Steve.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
I'd concur as well.
all right, very good. So we'll be agreeable to those, waiving those 2 items. Anything else to add,
No,
Francisco?
no.
We have to
no.
take a vote on that?
I don't know if we need a motion on that.
I just want to make sure we do it very well.
Yeah.
All right, so to be safe, I will move that based on the preliminary traffic analysis presented by McMahon and Condyne's comments, that we waive the analysis of Burt Street and the Saturday midday counts. And all other comments will be addressed by Condyne as discussed and issued back for any further analysis needed to be made by McMahon.
I will
you, Julie.
second that.
All right, thank you.
I'm fine with that on the condition that the further information we're being provided does not significantly increase the traffic heading in that direction. I don't know what that's going to
Well,
look
the
like.
further info is
I think
just the backup to what he
I think
requested.
what Orin is saying is if the changes that Condyne and McMahon discuss change any of the assumptions that,
Yeah, if there's
we
any
talked about,
material
that we
difference
look at
from
it
what we
again.
have
That's
now
all.
in terms of traffic counts, yeah.
yeah, and
That's-
that'll be part of the process, I'm sure, when you look at everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, regardless, so a motion on the floor and seconded. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye, all opposed, nays? All right, passes unanimously. All right,
Thank you so much.
thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco, appreciate your time tonight.
So now, Amy Ball will be talking about her comments on wetlands, and you'll see her report. It's dated November 5th. It should be right after Francisco's report.
Okay,
Hi, good evening. Amy Ball, I'm the senior ecologist with Horsley Witten Group. I'm just going to give you a quick overview. Horsley Witten was retained by the planning board with sort of an eye to what the Conservation Commission has for concerns with wetlands protection for this project. And so my focus is going to be primarily on the wetland resource areas. I'll try not to get too into the weeds on that one. And then Janet will follow up with her review on the stormwater management design. And of course, the two are tied together because the protection of water resources is also tied to water quality and, the stormwater design. So I don't know how much the planning board has had interaction or a chance to review some of the comments that conservation has. I know that they submitted a letter to the applicant or response to the applicant. So a lot of my comments are going to be echoed in that, by the Conservation Commission as well. So from a wetlands perspective, the site, while it's an existing golf course practice facility, it has, some buildings, there's a parking lot, and some driveways with impervious surface. There's also abandoned agricultural fields that I guess are no longer being mowed or harvested. You also have wetland resource areas, and this includes bordering vegetative wetlands or BVW. I'll use those terms interchangeably. Flood zones, so you've got a bordering land subject to flooding. It's the 100-year flood zone associated with the Canoe River. There is also some rare species habitat on the site, not necessarily being impacted, but it's out there. And some potential vernal pools, which is tied to that same layer in terms of bringing in yet another state agency, the State Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. And then you also have a floodplain overlay protection district and a water resources protection district, and the site's in an ACEC. So there's a bunch of concerns in terms of protection of water quality, all associated with that sort of overlapping and of resource areas. So that the project itself, from wetlands perspective, is altering about 6.5 acres, give or take, of the flood zone. So in this case, it's anything below elevation, either 73.5 or 74. It breaks up the property at different areas based upon the FEMA maps. It's also altering riverfront area. This is an area that is extending out from the mean annual high water of the edge of the Canoe River out 200 feet from that. So that's a resource area. So there's alteration of about 15,000 square feet of riverfront area. And there are buffer zone impacts, which is the 100-foot buffer to the wetlands. And then we think there may be a potential for alteration of wetlands themselves. And I can get into some details about that, but it would be associated with the road widening of Leonard Street. So based upon the plans we had for our peer review and some of the information we gleaned from some of the MEPA documents that were submitted at the state review level for the ENF and the DEIR and the FEIR, we sort of have big picture comments at this point, which is really seeking sort of a need for a project narrative to go along with the notice of intent applications that were filed with Conservation. And a narrative that describes the impacts to the resource areas and to basically address the performance standards under the Wetlands Protection Act and address the local conservation policies that are in place. The performance standards are basically saying, if you're working in these resource areas, you must meet these certain criteria in order for the project to actually meet the performance standards and therefore be permittable under that state statute. So what we were seeking a lot of is sort of a clarification on the impacts based upon just a quick review of the site plans and the documents we've got. We know that there's alterations to flood zone, alterations to riverfront area. It's not cut and dry whether these are sort of, forgive this, but negative alterations, like alterations that are associated with the actual project development, or if they are alterations, say, associated with sort of a mitigating effect. Like there's a reference to about 8,000 of the square feet of riverfront area alteration that may be actually sort of restoration of that area. So having that clarification of what are the impacts and what is the qualification of the impacts is something that is really helpful for the Conservation Commission to understand. We're looking for a little bit of greater detail shown on the plans, maybe some spot elevations, some better marking of elevations. In some cases, there are contours that don't seem to match up. The riverfront area as a resource area in of itself requires the submission of an alternatives analysis that goes into sort of a big picture based upon the type of development you're looking at. For instance, if this were a single-family dwelling, a single house, you would be looking at an alternatives analysis that considers costs and logistics and available technology for just that house, just on a single lot. When you start to get with a bigger project, say of a subdivision, the scope of your alternatives analysis goes beyond just a single lot or a single area. And in this case, I believe the scope of their alternatives analysis really needs to look regionally, so not just in Norton, but in other areas. The applicant may very well have done this already. I know that they've gone through the whole MEPA process, and that's a pretty extensive review at the state level. But for the Conservation Commission specifically, they're going to need to address that for work in this resource area, this 200-foot riverfront area. I'm going to leave Janet with the compensatory flood storage, the mitigation for work within the flood zone. She'll speak to that a little bit more in her presentation. But we are also seeking some quantification, some clarification of what is exactly being altered in the flood zone and how is that being mitigated through what we call compensatory flood storage. So basically providing a place for these floodwaters to go if they can't go where they're going now. We would also like to see some clarifications, some details, maybe some cross-sections. I know I saw at least one, and I believe it was the preliminary subdivision plans, if I'm using that term correctly, where there was a cross-section that shows Leonard Street and how the road would be widened, and there were some retaining walls. And in that detail, we're looking at maybe a distance of about 18 inches from the footer of the retaining wall to the edge of the wetlands, and that leaves a lot of room for thinking that maybe there might be alteration of the wetlands. And I bring that up only because you're in this ACEC, the Canoe River Aquifer Area of Critical Environmental Concern, ACEC. And wetland alteration, for the most part, is forbidden within it. It's not permittable without a variance from the Wetlands Protection Act. The one exception to that is if there is a water-dependent project. Conservation brought up that there may be some culverts beneath Leonard Street that may need to be improved. At the very least, I think they need to be maintained or cleaned, I think is the term that was brought forward to the Commission. And so clarification on that would be really important for general understanding of whether or not there might be some permittable or not permittable wetland impacts. Again, Janet will talk about the stormwater design, how that ties to the protection of the water resources and the water quality. And then the final thing that we looked at for conservation and for planning board's comprehension is wildlife habitat. The alterations to resource areas, when they exceed a certain threshold, and generally that's 5,000 square feet, and of course we're looking at like 6.5 acres, so far more than that for flood zone, and 5,000 square feet for the riverfront area. The applicant is required to submit to the Conservation Commission a wildlife habitat evaluation. And this really just goes toward not rare species so much as just general wildlife habitat. And that information is then taken and maybe helps formulate what the applicant might propose for some sort of mitigation for alterations of resource areas, or if there's some lost habitat, how they might mitigate that by maybe enhancing habitat. And so, from what I gather from the MEPA documents, yes, they have compensatory flood storage. They do seem to have some riverfront area restoration of about 8,000 square feet. There is a discussion, not really a big discussion, but it shows on the plans a greenbelt area that's shown all along the Canoe River. It's about 2.7 acres. There's land revegetation, which I believe is tied to the agricultural fields and allowing those to grow back. And then there's some land preservation of about 22.6 acres of the property that won't be developed and probably couldn't be developed, but could lend toward an overall sort of mitigation package from conservation's perspective. That they're seeking some additional clarifications and some details about how all of this would come to play. What does that mean? Is there a plan for revegetation in these greenbelt areas? Is there a plan for any specific revegetation of those fields? Are they just going to be allowed to grow back? And because it's become a very big hot topic in the past, decade or so, invasive species are out there, and if we're looking to have mitigation be meaningful, you want to put back native plant communities that will provide native habitat for the local species. And so there's a handful of non-native species in there that will, given the opportunity, and they do take every opportunity they can get, to spread in and then take over that habitat, and basically your mitigation is lost. So really, big picture, we're just looking for some details, some narrative to help the Conservation Commission understand what are the resource area impacts and what that means not only for conservation but for the the overall town comprehension of what's going to be happening with this project. So I'll turn it back over to you. I realize that I usually present to conservations, and this may be my first planning board meeting, so I know you look to different things, but.
Well, thank you for the overview
Sure.
Of everything we've provided. I know the planning board received the information, recently, and I assume the gentleman from Condyne have also received this. I'm not sure when you received the report on this. Any initial questions? I'll start with the board first. Certainly a lot of requests for clarifications, additional
right.
information. It didn't seem that there was any, major areas of concern or,
Right, not at this point until
Yeah.
we get some more detail.
Right. Okay. Any other?
I'd rather defer to let them respond to this. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very detailed stuff.
Right.
There's more information that's going to be required. So at this point, to jump into it would probably be not very productive.
Okay.
Mark, you want to just
Yeah,
give
I'll,
a reply and?
I'm going to, again, yes, we will provide a response with all the information requested. I do want to cover a couple topics,
Sure.
that we'd like to talk about, just to get a clarification on tonight, hopefully get a clarification on tonight.
And Mark, do you have the same November 5th? If you just want to reference, if you're going to hit a specific topic, what page you're on, and
Yeah,
just so we're all reading the same book.
The, under, under the rare species, we're proposing not to do any work in that area. So I think there may be a portion of what we're calling this green belt in that area. And again, our intention to the green belt was that we weren't actually doing work in that area, but we're still working through the potential for restoration, the potential to continue the agricultural use, the potential to maintain invasives. We got a lot of area, and I think we presented a previous plan where, including the green belt, we also have another, it's almost up to 14 acres that are being used for, and they are actively, right up to this fall, was mowed for hay, agricultural uses. So we're still working on the appropriate end result of what those areas are. We don't intend to replant trees over 14 acres of land. We just can't do that. But I think a potential use is the continued agricultural use for that. You know, there's
Where was
large
that, where
areas.
was that area, Mark? If you can just point out on,
I think you're probably talking about these couple areas right here.
large areas up here.
Could you just identify the color coding, what that represents, if you can?
Oh, boy, okay, so this wasn't my color coding.
Yeah, I could, you want me to explain it?
Sure, this one's in orange, I got that, but after that, I'm not sure.
I think this is Paul's great work.
It's
No, it's
Jennifer.
actually Jennifer's. I use different
A lot
color
of
coding
Mine's
myself.
not as
but-
good.
Yes, flood zone, and the lines represent, this is the area where the flood zone is, this is the area where the flood zone is. Yellow is just highlighting the compensatory storage, whether it's a fill area or it's a added storage area. Green is highlighting the drainage for the project. Yellow is highlighting the property lines.
Blue is,
Blue is the
Canoe River, or
the
no?
actual floodway. you
Okay,
see
so
we're not
Canoe River
doing
is
any
below
work
that.
in the floodway. The riverfront area is this orange line.
pale orange.
Yeah.
Oh, there is a
The-
different orange
As you
there,
said,
yeah.
your color code.
The
Yeah.
physical proposed work we're doing in the riverfront is this section of parking right here. There is a minor portion of drainage in the riverfront area as well, but that is that, and this is that 8,000 square feet of riverfront. I think in one of the studies, I'm not exactly sure where that picture was taken, but there's some debris we're proposing to remove.
Yeah.
We don't want to detrimentally try to clean that out, but by hand, you know, remove any debris, tires, and just, there's a picture in there.
I think that was actually on the far
Yeah,
side of the
page 11.
site,
Is
but
that part?
I think it was over here somewhere.
Okay, but yeah, there's areas where, you know, we do a one-time, non-invasive, you know, we're not gonna go in there with an excavator and just rip the place apart. But that's the plan, yeah. I mean, this area, believe it or not, has been mowed for hay, and it's actually wetlands, so that needs to stop. But this is upland and, you know, the large green areas. So we're still, in fact, I'm walking with my environmental consultant tomorrow morning to continue discussing, you know, what's the best way to manage these big areas, as well as, this tail line is the limit of work. Oh, no, sorry.
Oh, that's riverfront. I think it's a
Limit of work
dark dash
is,
line, isn't it?
Not here.
It might not be on this set.
But it's clearly on the set of plans. You know, there's, again, large areas of existing golf driving range that are not going to be used anymore. And we want to select the appropriate future use to reestablish that, or to, you know, how to let it go. One thing my consultant did share is that when there's existing grass areas, it's less prone to invasives versus if you strip something off
Right, and try
and
to replant
you
it.
know, you just leave it there, and invasives will grow like crazy. So if it is grassed, it's less prone, but obviously over time there's creeping, and, you know, invasives will show up. But as far as the existing green spaces, we are, it's noted throughout both the stormwater and the wetlands areas, so we are looking into how to best handle the future of those areas. But there's a clear limit of work on the plans, and, you know, outside of that, you know, we're not proposing any work. Another item, we understand it's in the ACEC. I'm gonna hold off on the flood zone for now until we go through the stormwater items. You know, the compensatory storage discussions, I'm gonna hold off on that. The bordering vegetation bordering vegetated wetland modification potential as a result of the Leonard Street widening. We will provide additional sections throughout the project. There's at least 3 areas where we're need retaining walls around culverts and things like that, so we'll provide additional information. I do believe there's a few different options. It's correct that you cannot modify wetlands in the ACEC. One idea in the conservation agent's letter was potential. There was a statement saying the culverts were undersized and recommending they be replaced. We don't have supporting information saying they are undersized, but we've already proposed to clean them. I mean, I think some of them are possibly 50% silted up, which is, you know, capacity's at half when that happens. We'll definitely look at structural integrity, but right now we're not proposing to replace those, but it could be an opportunity to mitigate if we had to with the widening, but we're continuing to provide details on that widening. One item I wanted to just discuss is the wetland, the habitat area, specifically the areas of the flood zone modification in relation to habitat, because we're modifying a resource area in relation to habitat. Right in the Wetlands Protection Act, Section 10.57(1)(a)(3) states that certain
2A3.
1A3, I think.
Oh, in the preamble?
Yeah.
Okay.
That floodplain and within 100 feet bank and within bordering vegetated wetland is crucial to habitat, but there is an exception. It says, except for those portions of which have been so extensively altered by human activity that their important wildlife habitat functions have been effectively eliminated. Such altered areas include paved and graveled areas, golf courses, cemeteries, playgrounds, landfills, fairgrounds, quarries, gravel pits, buildings, lawns, gardens, and similar areas lawfully existing on November 1, 1987, and maintained as such since that time. Historically, the initial lease for the golf range was in '84. We believe it's been functioning as such at that time. So we're just, we have provided a habitat study, but we also believe that in the areas of the use of the golf range, that under this provision is exempt. So we just would like to note that. I mean, we will, anything outside of the golf range usage, we can continue to address their comments. We can provide supporting documentation as they were requested.
Okay, Mark, would you just recap for me what the reference number of that and?
It is 310 CMR 10.57, and then 1 in parentheses,
Yeah.
and then little a in parentheses,
3.
and then number 3.
Okay, thank you.
No parentheses, just number 3. I think.
Amy, your evaluation of that would obviously be in whatever further review you have with.
Right, so not all of the alterations are in the golf course, some of them are elsewhere. And I appreciate that they do have, some exemption. I think there was a concern that there's also some potential vernal pools that are shown on the Natural Heritage State GIS layer. And one of those, at least one of those is sort of near the golf course, and so the habitat of that was something that Jennifer had expressed some concern on.
And we will add those to the
Right,
plan and address, again, we'll address every comment throughout the report.
Yeah.
Just wanted to outline that one particular one. I think the rest of the items might be better suited for during the drainage discussions.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Anything else? All right, any other comments before we proceed to the stormwater and drainage discussion?
Did we get separate comments from the Conservation Commission responding to the special permits?
You may have. I know that there was a letter was written.
In response to the special permits?
Oh, I don't know.
Was that?
Yep.
We received that as well. We'll provide,
Yeah.
we're incorporating those comments. And,
They were in your, electronically, in the Dropbox.
They were in the
Okay.
Should
Dropbox,
have
yeah.
made them for tonight.
Yeah.
To a point, there's a bit of division of responsibilities here
Yeah.
with
Right.
regards to that as well,
Number-
so.
Yeah.
6 Conservation Commission.
That looks, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was in the Dropbox, yeah.
The November 6th one?
Okay, yeah.
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 That was,
To you, Mark, addressed to you.
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, thank you, Amy.
Sure.
For presenting. And gentlemen, Mark, thanks for replying and continued working on this effort, you know, with Conscom.
Yep.
All right, so next, Janet Bernardo, if I have that correct? With
correct.
Horsley Witten. So you're next up, so
Hey, thank you.
thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks. Again, my name is Janet Bernardo. I'm a professional engineer with the Horsley Witten Group. And just to kind of bring you, maybe you already have heard this from the applicant, but just as a quick understanding, there are, do I have to be right next to this microphone?
Yeah,
Can I
reasonably
move it?
close.
Oh, can I carry it? So there's 5 lots, as you are aware. And the stormwater management system for these 5 lots is kind of interconnected. So you have to look at it as a whole. Frequently, when we review things, we look at them one by one, like lot by lot. And so I started that, and then I realized that it was easier to look at it basin by basin. So there are 8 infiltration basins all intertwined with these 5 lots. So lot 1, 2, 3, and 4 all end up somehow associated with the large infiltration basin that's down in the bottom corner. So part of the project, because of their association with the wetlands, they are required under the Wetlands Protection Act to meet the Massachusetts stormwater standards. According to your town stormwater bylaw, if they were outside of the wetlands, they would also have to meet those standards. There are 10 standards that that are called out under the Massachusetts Stormwater Handbook. And so in my letter, in our letter that's dated November 2nd, 2018, it's kind of a lengthy, slightly boring, dry letter. Stormwater, we try to make it exciting, but it's it's a tough subject. Right up there, traffic. So there's 10 standards, and the first standard is about if there's going to be erosion in a wetland or a waterway. So the idea of the design is to make sure that there's no increase of erosion. So the design, if it was outside of the borderline land subject to flooding, would not have, there wouldn't be really a concern. It looked like they designed it appropriately. And with the infiltration basins, typically engineers love infiltration basins. They work out really well. We want to recharge back to the aquifer. It's a good process. So because of the potential floodplain coming up to elevation 74, any of the pre-treatment systems that are part of this whole stormwater system. If the floodplain's higher than the bioretention areas, the storm scepters, the treatment doesn't get to happen because it's under water already. So that's our big concern under Standard 1. Standard 2 basically talks about the pre-existing and post-development basin basically being the runoff is the same. So they have to design their system so that they don't increase their discharge to any of the points. So they have 3 discharge points under existing conditions. This discharge point 1 is the up corner. So basically, there's a small area here that runs off to the Leonard Street, East Main Street intersection. I think number 2 is, this is bordering vegetated wetland, BVWG. The large system is considered BVWH. So they, I think 2 is the intersection where G kind of comes down this little channel and hits H. So the discharge point 2 is over here, and just, oh, this is 3, sorry.
Clarify, yeah.
Thanks, I couldn't remember the, and so then 2 is the large, it's really associated with Canoe River. So this is the large one, and it's fine to say this entire wetland boundary is discharge point 2, because it's all basically running down this way with the driving range and everything else all coming here. So they have to show the discharge to each of those places does not increase from existing to proposed. They've eliminated discharge point 1 in their design. So they've taken all the runoff, and it's just a small area, so it's totally fine because they're not increasing. They can decrease, they just can't increase. So they're taking that and they're moving it to other places. By adding these different systems and putting in the bioretention areas, they have 10 bioretention areas for pretreatment. They have 3 storm scepters, which is basically a structural practice similar to a large drain manhole. And they have catch basins, and they have some vegetated swales and some vegetated filter strips. Basically, because of the different criteria that we kind of get into, they need to hit 44% pretreatment before they get to these infiltration basins. So in the letter under Standard 2, I kind of outlined each of the infiltration basins and what they were meeting along the way. They used the HydroCAD software program, which is a very common practice, typically, very commonly used among engineers, so that was fine. And I kind of went through to make sure that they hit the different criteria for each, that they had their pretreatment, that they met the 44%, that they had separation to groundwater. So I went through all the different bits, and we look at the input of the HydroCAD program to make sure that we are agreeing with their design matches the calculations and the model. So there are some various pieces that maybe they had their outlet showed a weir, but the model showed a pipe. So there's some kind of minor things that they'll be able to tweak. I assume that they're relatively minor.
But you don't want to speak for them. That's
Yeah, I don't want to speak for them. But I believe that they'll be able to work with making the adjustments in the HydroCAD. The largest concern is, again, with the flooding, potential flooding of the system with the bordering land subject to flooding elevation. And the concern being that if there's like, I think 5 maybe, like this basin's just out of it. This basin, there's a basin here, basin 5, basin 6, kind of lost track of the basins. There within, like the orange line again, is the bordering land subject to flooding line, and everything on this side of it is within the bordering land subject to flooding. So any of the basins that are in that area are in what's the 100-year floodplain. So they're lower than the floodplain, and so if the floodplain waters are coming up They can't infiltrate if they're full of water. So that's a tweak, a bigger tweak in their HydroCAD model, because now they can't exfiltrate during the larger storms. And I'm not sure where the elevation changes for like a 10-year storm event or a 2-year storm event, if some of those basins are like elevation 71. So if it's the 10-year storm events at elevation 72, then it doesn't get to infiltrate for that storm either. So my recommendation is that they make some adjustments in their HydroCAD model to show that they're not exfiltrating during any storm event that already has water in the basins. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a bigger, a little bit bigger. They'll have to work a little bit more with their calculations. So that's really standard 2. Standard 3 has to do with recharge. Because they have all these infiltration basins, they are meeting the recharge requirement. I have some suggestions for them as far as defining their impervious areas, because it was difficult for us to figure out exactly which impervious areas were targeted for each area. They have numbers, they had calculations. We tried to match those. So some of them we couldn't quite follow. Standard 4 is about water quality and total suspended solids. Basically, again, like a bioretention area with a filter strip together, have 44%. It's a catch basin is considered 25%. A catch basin that goes to a storm scepter or a catch basin that goes to a bioretention area, that gives you 44%. Catch basin by itself gives you 25%. It's like a whole math exercise that you have to go to, this whole process. But they've done that process. And so for the most part, they've met those criteria. Again, the concern is if it's underwater, then you're not meeting it. So whether some of those things can come up, that's for the applicant to try to kind of figure that out. Standard 5 has to do with a land use of higher potential pollutant loads. It's a LUPL. Because it has a high vehicle anticipated, 1,000 vehicle trips per day would make it qualify as a land use of higher potential pollutant loads, as well as like a gas station would, a junkyard. I mean, there's certain areas, lots of heavy trucks, makes it qualify as a LUPL. So that means there's certain things like meeting the 44% reduction, meeting certain types of systems are required. And so the Stormwater Handbook lists, you could have these kind of things in a LUPL. They've met that. So that was fine. Standard 6 has to do with the Zone 2, which they are also in. They kind of hit them all with this project. But a lot of the requirements are the same. Like the 44% is a big piece of that. And but one of the problems with the Zone 2 is that a bioretention area in itself infiltrates, so you need to meet the 44% before you get to a bioretention area unless you line it. So there are a number of areas that they have a vegetative filter strip, which gives you 25, and then the bio, so there's not 44% before the bioretention area. Bioretention area lined can still still serves the purpose. It still gives you the water quality. It just doesn't infiltrate. And so if there's a spill of some sort, which is the concern, you want to keep your water quality clean. It's drinking water. You want to make sure that it doesn't get something contaminated in it. And so the intention is to have a stop guard. So you can capture, if there's a spill, you can capture it before it starts to infiltrate into the wall. So 7 is for redevelopment. Turns out they don't qualify for redevelopment, at least for the majority of it, because they are increasing their impervious area. So that was the one that they did not qualify for. 8 is regarding erosion and sedimentation control. So they have provided some control measures. We have a number of comments, of suggestions. I know they will be required to put together a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is also called a SWIP. Our recommendation had been to include one within 14 days prior to land disturbance because that's what's required under EPA's NIPD's regulation, which is why they need the SWIP, because they're disturbing more than 1 acre of land. The conservation agent has suggested that she would like to see it much earlier than that. So she's going to make a recommendation to have it with enough time to really review it and to go through and make sure that their erosion controls are in place and that they're lining, they're putting up their buffers before they're 50 foot from the wetlands, and that they're having their stockpiles are protected with erosion controls, and they have sediment traps in place and construction entrances. And so we have a few recommendations to improve their erosion controls, but my guess is that they're not particularly difficult to man. Standard 9 is regarding operation and maintenance. And one of the big pieces on a project like this, because there's all these different lots, is to make sure that the property owners or the tenants, whether there's one overseeing everything, or who's dealing with what. Are they just looking at the ones that are right next to their building? Particularly who's dealing with the big one at the bottom that so many of the projects go to. So making sure that the operation and maintenance is part of each tenant's agreement, if they're buying or if they're leasing or however that works. So understanding how the operation and maintenance will happen in the long run. And standard 10 is illicit discharge statement, which they did provide. Basically, it's to say, we're not going to discharge sewer water to our stormwater system. That's kind of the intention of an illicit discharge statement, that they are very well aware of what is going on their property. So we went through the 10 standards. That was the initial part of our letter. Now, we also went through the groundwater protection and the floodplain and the compensatory storage that Amy mentioned. So my big concern, not my concern, but my confusion is that they need to show 1 foot increments for compensatory storage. And just trying to make sure we understood where it all was. They started showing some areas that I was able to start checking off, but then I couldn't keep following along. So we're just looking for more information to clarify exactly what's being cut and what's being stored. The one thing that, the way we looked at it for some of these infiltration basins, so this part gets a little confusing, so stop me when this doesn't make sense. The way I looked at it.
No. Just kidding.
If the existing ground is at 72, and they have to have a separation of 2 feet or 4 feet, 2 feet if they're doing a mounding analysis, which they did when it was appropriate, sorry. 4 feet, 4 feet separation, they do not need to do a mounding analysis. 2 feet of separation, they need it. They provided those calculations. But, so if you have your existing ground at 72, did I say 72?
Yeah, 72.
72. And they have separation is like 68. So you have your separation down here. Your flood water comes up to 74. So they excavated down 1 foot, still had their separation of 2 feet. And their stormwater system only came up to elevation 72. So what was dirt is now stormwater. So they haven't taken away the flood storage that was above it. So it's still there.
No net change.
No net change. In theory, it's hard to tell because it's a building in some of those places. So there's some calculations that have to be shown, but and so the stickling point is that back to standard 2, where they couldn't exfiltrate if if that flood storage got there before the stormwater did. So there's enough room for both. It just, the modeling has to work. And the pre-treatment can't be underwater.
Yeah.
So that was the way I was looking at it. The other thing, I know we received a response from the applicant. Did that just go to us?
It went to you and Paul and Jennifer, and I didn't go to the whole board. though.
So it was really regarding the floodplain. And so the FEMA map and the FEMA, there's a little FEMA map that maybe was part of Amy Ball's.
I don't know if we have that.
It might have been, she might have included it. Did you include that FEMA map in yours? Yeah. In Amy's,
Oh, okay.
it's kind of a colorful map. The applicant had originally shown the flood elevation as 74, which is the first kind of thing that pulls out on, when you look at a FEMA map, it comes out as 74. So I looked at it 74, they looked at it 74. Amy decided to look at it at 73 and a half. So,
Way to go, Amy.
but, so when you look closer at the map, and what the applicant has also done is, with part of the floodplain information, there's a flood insurance study. And the flood insurance study has this little profile, am I holding up right? So has a profile that goes along with the little ferment cross sections. And so those cross sections go across the property, and so they're anywhere between 73 and a half and 74. The profile kind of shows it more at 73 and a half, which is what their question is tonight, is 73 and a half acceptable? Is that correct?
Correct.
That's the question. That's the big topic. All of that just to decide if we're holding a half a foot. So we looked at it a lot in our office today. Our agreement that 73 and a half is the floodplain, 100-year floodplain elevation for this particular area. It does seem to have 74 is up there and floating. However, they still need to show their 1-foot increments. So one of our problems with the flood storage was some of the contours were shut off for the proposed conditions. So we just couldn't tie them in right without holding everything up to windows and maps. And so we needed to be able to see all the contours so that we could compare what was fill and what was cut. And if it's going to be a half-foot contour, we're going to need to have a half-foot contours shown. So keeping that in mind, we can accept 73 and a half. We just will need to see the contours really clearly labeled.
Details behind it, yeah.
So that's kind of the big item in our mind. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and just while we're on it, so this exhibit up on the screen is to just so you have an idea of the difference. The blue line is this new 73 and a half line. The green line, which one is this?
Above
Yeah,
it.
Top
labeled
green.
74.
Above it, right,
Yeah,
is
so, I
74.
mean, it's a change. It's not a big change, but it is a change. And, I mean, we're looking at every aspect of this project very thoroughly. So when doing that, 73.5 is the line. So just to give an idea of the change, you know, it's there. It does affect the compensatory storage and the fill, and we are prepared to provide a detailed plan with all the suggested information. It'll be probably even a standalone plan. It'll be part of the set, but it'll be its plan sheet. It'll have the requested table. A lot of the times they do a table because if you fill between 71 and 72, you have to provide the storage between 71 and 72. So there's a table, shows every piece up and down of what we're doing. So, but just you know, we're moving forward with the 73.4 or 5 contour.
The positive, though, is that it's less fill and alteration that's of that flood zone area, and it increases I believe we're 1.1 to 1 on the compensatory storage. That is
Well, I couldn't
supposed to be
confirm that,
provided.
but that's what they're supposed to
It's supposed to
provide.
be provided, And what we're providing is almost a 1.5 because it's much larger now. So we're not changing our compensatory. We still have the same volume, and we're pulling back that floodplain line. So we're providing much more, almost 1.5 times, when we're only supposed to require 1 to 1.
Well, I'm glad you're not changing it, because I was a little worried about that.
Nope.
Maybe you could show 74 is 1 to 1 and 73.5 is 1.5 to 1. That would really make me feel good.
Yeah, all that detailed information will be provided. Exactly, it'll show, I think we can show that the 73 to 73.5 as a half contour. I don't believe we need to go half contours all the way down to.
Well, you need to show 1 foot increments.
Yeah.
So you're either showing 72.5 to 73.5,
Right.
or 72 to 73, and that's not gonna, so it's
Right.
1 foot, whichever your foots are gonna be.
Yeah, you're starting from
Yeah,
a foot either way.
or ending.
Yeah.
So one of our comment number 16, on page 12 of 14, just to make sure that everybody understands what we were looking for here, part of the hydraulic floodplain is that it has to be hydraulically connected to the initial floodplain. So putting these basins in, the way I was looking at it is if, I think I gave an example of this one up here because it took me a while to find the one that I could easily make an example of. But there, this basin, when they come lower, they're now excavated down, but the elevation of the weir or the outlet basically has to be the same hydraulically connected as the existing conditions, so that the water that could get there before can get there again. Does that make sense? And did that make sense to you when I had that comment? Because it was a little bit confusing for me to get there. So I want to make sure that the idea is any water that could get to that spot under existing conditions needs to still get there under proposed conditions. So it's a little confusing to show, but that's kind of the intention. So as far as the groundwater protection, and that this is an area of critical environmental concern, as Amy mentioned, there's a few items there that the applicant will need to kind of just address to make sure that it's clear that they're not storing any hazardous chemicals outside. That, they should be relatively straightforward. They can meet a lot of it under, like, my comment number 19, that basically by meeting the stormwater management standards, they are proving that they are meeting this criteria for 310 CMR 2221, parentheses 2, parentheses B, parentheses 7. So just to show that they're in compliance with the Mass DEP standards, they will be in compliance with the drinking water protection. There is one other one that they have to meet for the MS4 permit as well, making sure that they're dealing with their total suspended solids as well as their total phosphorus removal. With infiltration systems, they should be able to do that, but they'll need to provide the calculation.
Okay.
So, any questions?
Well, the engineer and me found this very fascinating. I hope it did everyone as well. But overall, it sounds like there's nothing that's unachievable and nothing.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's a little bit trickier than others, and
Obviously, a lot of additional
Yeah.
information needed from the folks at Condyne to provide
Yeah.
to confirm and validate that. And obviously, we thank you for the review and continued review of the additional material that'll be provided to
And
give us
did
that
you have
assurance.
any questions about any of the comments so that you should, making sure that you understood them?
I think I've gone through everything. Again, we're going to provide, there's a lot of just technical, provide this detail, provide that detail, make sure this orifice is at the right elevation or right type. Provide all responses and updated plans for that.
And we gave you a Word document of this,
Yep,
right? So you
yep,
can just,
Yep, so we've already gone through everything. We're just, in the process now of addressing comments, so. Again, we will provide a written response as well as providing the plans back and expect a second review. Relatively typical procedures, and I assume if any questions in between, we can talk freely with the consultant, right? There's no...
That's fine,
Yeah.
to go back and forth.
Any questions from the board? Or
I've got a question. Thank you for that presentation. It's very helpful. And I thank you guys. I think that there's a lot of work that's gone into this. And I think in going with a project of this size, given the sensitivity of this project, I mean, we're just getting dizzy listening of all the different things that it's subject to. The question I have is, I'm assuming they're going to need to comply with all the specifics of each of these regulations.
Yes.
From conservation and the like. In light of the fact that there's such a combination of all of these things happening to one site, is there anything above and beyond which is strictly a requirement that you would recommend as being appropriate for this project in terms of the areas that you're looking at that's not being done now?
Well, I guess I would reduce the size of this building, if that's what you're asking.
But yeah,
I mean, I think it's a lot for this particular site. It's a sensitive site. It's an area of critical environmental concern is something to not take lightly. You really want to deal with the fact that there is habitat there, that it is a water resource, that it is drinking water supply. There's a lot going on for this site for a reason. And they are going to, they're proposing warehouse uses. That's trucks. There's a lot of movement happening there. They have provided appropriate stormwater management control measures, but there's still a lot going on this property, and that's something that I think you should take very seriously and pay attention to.
is it the overall site or is it a particular building that's problematic at this point?
I see this as the problem. This big building that's inside these areas is reasonable, but basically you can see all these green pipes. All of this area basically discharges down to here, which is fine, but it is now taking it all and bringing it into the bordering vegetated wetland closer to the river. Everything is coming to the same place for the most part. I mean, there's other basins that are smaller, but this is the biggest area. Which lots of projects are designed with, one large basin, there's 8 basins, but is one largest one that is kind of controlling the whole thing.
Putting all your stormwater eggs in one basket, so to speak.
So to speak, yes. I mean, for 4 of the buildings, 4 buildings all go towards this one large basin. I mean, Building 3 does have a small basin next to it, a bioretention area near it. But I guess this Building 5 is particularly large, and it's particularly invasive in the floodplain as well. I mean, we've had so much rain lately, and the floodplains are coming up, and so that's why I was like, yes. The engineer in me says 73.5 is the correct number under the regulations. However, we're getting a lot of rain. The climate change is coming. It's here. And so it's just going to come higher. And so I wouldn't have wanted them to reduce what they're already providing for flood storage, because I wouldn't think that would be a wise choice. But it's also, I'm kind of a rule follower, so it's 73.5 is accurate.
All right, anything else? Any other comments from anyone out there? I know that there's a lot of detailed information here. All right. Janet, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Look forward to continue working with you. All right. Paul,
Thank you.
we'll turn it back to you.
I'm going to follow Janet's lead and hold the microphone because I'm going to also be pointing at this map a lot. I I was reviewing this from the really the perspective of the site plan requirements itself. So we had a very deep dive into traffic and into floodplains and wetlands. So I was looking at mobility. In addition, looking at other requirements that are really necessary for projects and also other amenities that would contribute and make this a better project for people. So what I'd like to do is first, just by starting, just going over to the map and working left to right. And I don't have that many. I want to just focus on what I think are the more significant issues. But first, I want to start right at the intersection here. They're going to be providing a traffic signal and a crosswalk across 123. It would really be great if a crosswalk is added across Leonard Street. That'll be very helpful. Again, I'm looking at this from a pedestrian perspective as well. So if we can get that. In addition, looking back when we were discussing this driveway off of 123 and the concerns about truck movement, well, one thought as I was looking at this also from a pedestrian perspective and thinking about how safe it could be for people to cross, we think we have an opportunity to work with the consultants to try to really shorten, not shorten, but I like to think of teeing off that intersection as much as possible. Looking at the intersection radius for the turning movements and reducing it so that it's not so much of a circular turn as there is. And so the benefit, there's a couple benefits of that. One is it will help if a person, just think if a person is walking out, person's crossing here and trying to cross, and there's a car coming here, turning right. From my experience, most of those drivers are looking left, and because the turn is, you have a wider turn, it's easy to make that turn. Shorten that up a little bit so that pedestrian who's crossing doesn't have to worry as much about a car who's not looking at them. The other benefit of that is, getting to your point, Oren, is with that turning radius shortened a bit, that's going to make it tougher for trucks to get in, just by its nature, unless they drive over the curb. So I think there are benefits to providing a tighter turning radius. So there's information I've given to the applicants that will work. But I also realize we need to make sure that we're not doing something that affects the flow of traffic coming in, especially toward 495. So we'll work with them and our consultants to make sure that that's not. But I just want to put that out there that, there could be ways in which we can deal with pedestrian safety and trucks entering in here. Another issue.
Real quick, before you move on, just
Yep.
in terms of that Leonard Street intersection, you're suggesting of a crosswalk going across. What, in terms of existing or even planned of additional sidewalk on that side, is there anything there now, or is there
On the north side?
north side of Leonard Street? If, by adding
No,
a
I don't
crosswalk
believe-
there,
There's nothing there now.
where would that lead people to walk if they were to cross Leonard?
Well, you can continue on East Main, which I believe there is a sidewalk through there.
Can I just
They-
provide a
oh,
little input
okay.
on this?
Sure, Mark, yeah.
That entire parcel on the corner has a conservation restriction, and there's just no room to add walkways. I mean, we'd love to do a crosswalk that way, but I don't believe in the future there will ever be a sidewalk
Okay.
either on Leonard or going up 123. So
Okay, well,
I think the one we have to go, you got.
Yeah, and that's kind
if
of
it's
what
a
I was
challenge, and, okay.
trying to understand, if, putting a crosswalk there, where is that leading them to? If there's no sidewalk or
think
Right.
there's ever
plans
gonna
for a
be
sidewalk or
access.
ability to put a sidewalk, then I'm not sure you would want to necessarily.
Nothing on that side of the street going on.
Yeah.
Well, we don't, okay, well, my apologies on that. We certainly don't want to be
that's fine.
having,
Yeah, that's
because this will come out come up with another issue. We don't want pedestrians just stopping.
Yeah, I don't want to lead
So,
people to.
my mistake on that. So we'll modify that comment
Yeah,
out.
that's fine.
Another issue we wanted to explore more with the commercial properties is they were doing a generation based on general retail, parking generation based on general retail. But as you'll recall from our meeting a couple weeks or a month ago on Kelly's Place with the parking overflow issues, we'd really like to find out, A, how many storefronts there are going to be on these commercial sites, and looking at least addressing some amount of square footage as a restaurant. Because again, they're not accounting for it right now, and this would be an ideal location for a restaurant. And what happens, we don't want to have that same situation like we saw recently with Kelly's Place, where it wasn't, when the project was approved years ago, it didn't account for it, and we're dealing with the challenges right now. So just moving across now, we've already talked about the two driveways, but one thing they're proposing to show a bus stop here. First, I know we need to make sure that we're coordinating with GATRA. Thank you, GATRA. And because making sure that it meets their specifications, but also there aren't any sidewalks here where the stop is identified, and we need to just make sure that there's safe areas for people to wait and to cross. So a few other things here. I should also point out, they certainly have done a great job of meeting all the dimensional requirements, setbacks, building heights, and all of that. They could possibly, this is not a requirement, but if they were to move the buildings closer to the setback lines, it could, and shift parking back, though they could create a closer, more of an enclosed effect for people who may be walking over here, even driving. But again, that's more of a design issue.
And I think that came up in a prior meeting, did it not, about either which side of the building more of the parking lot would, or more of the parking would,
Behind.
be
Well, that was-
situated behind,
Right.
or yeah.
Right. Couple other things on these building one, we need to see where the loading is. We don't see it on here. Location of dumpsters will need to be added. Also, bike racks in the retail areas. You show it in the warehouse areas, which is great, but we couldn't see it for here. So a couple other things. They're doing a great job of we can't really, we can see it here. It's not highlighted, but there's a walkway that they're building because they're avoiding the floodplain, which is a great thing, and this should create some really good views for people walking. But where it comes up to Leonard Street, it's not clear where it goes, so we're just suggesting, as they have the property across the way, that there would be a safe crossing there for people to go to. I'm not going to go into the details of the floodplain issues with this building, because Janet said it much better than I could. Let me just go, actually, I'm just going to go, there's a couple of more general things on here. We still do need the landscaping plan for this, Also, we want to see, it's important to see, to show what existing vegetation will be remaining that will be incorporated into their landscaping plan. And just a couple more things. We need to see the signage as well and ensure that the signage doesn't obstruct your views, particularly for drivers. As this site's within the Water Resources Protection Zone, we do require a list of what would be stored, what can potentially be stored in the warehouse buildings. And
That's a list of what could be stored, not a restriction on what could not be?
well, there are restrictions in the bylaws, so we just need to make sure we're following, because it does require a listing. And that's mine in a
Do we have
very
a
quick.
A lighting plan?
They do. The one remaining comment, which is pretty minor, is to just show the hours of operations of those lights.
Yeah.
But no, they've got all that. actually met quite a bit, and I want to acknowledge a lot of the things they've accomplished and meet. But those were the issues that we've identified. So,
Mark, any initial comments to?
Yeah, a quick
to Paul's?
response on a couple of the things. We already talked about the Leonard Street crossing. That the radius change on the entrance off of 123, we have to balance the requirements of the fire department. I understand, the purpose of what he's talking about, but we just need to balance that out, because that is the direction fire department will come from, across the highway. And, if Building 2 is on fire, they're not going to go to the light and come around. They're just going to enter. It's actually, I think, a requirement in your bylaw for a 25-foot radius or 35 even. So we just need to work through that, see what's best for that area. We can definitely provide a no truck entrance sign, some signage, but just that radius is one item.
yeah, and again, we'll certainly work with them and the other departments to make sure we get all of that.
The bus stop, we'll add that sidewalk. It just needs from where the bus stop is up to the driveway.
Right.
Is the nearest sidewalk. We'll add that. And we have, for the whole MEPA process, Gadras, they were good with that location. The minor, some of the technical details, landscape plan, the loading area, the parking in a restaurant. We could identify how many specific tenants. We could put a placeholder for a restaurant of a certain size, and we could recalculate the parking. We could show how many spaces we have during this process, or we could stay the course, and if a restaurant does come in, we have to come back to the planning board, and verify the parking spaces. We can incorporate a couple small restaurants and show where we are at parking. And through the whole MEPA process, and a comment was particularly at Building 5, we're proposing a bunch of future spaces that if we have a tenant such as Spears Manufacturing that we just put in a 135,000 square foot warehouse, which is essentially Building 4, they only needed 9 parking spaces for that entire building, and things like that. So it's tenant-based, and I think, and it's always reducing impervious area is the number one list on the environmentally sensitive thing you can do to reduce the footprint. So, we're trying to balance the number of parking spaces on the site as best we can, and that includes the retail area too. So we can introduce 2 small restaurants if we want to do that up front. We can do that and revise the calculations and show, where all those parking spaces are and how they all work together. We've already contacted an architect. It's based on square footages of anticipated and seats and 15 square feet per seat. And, we've already looked into all that information to be able to provide that.
Yeah, it'd be helpful to have that, perspective on, how much of a difference or change that would require should that be an option.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be most helpful, yeah.
Just Paul's comment number 1, I just wanted to bring up, which is a general comment regarding while the plans reflect the widening of Leonard Street, the applicant must file a permit for Leonard Street widening and receive approval from Board of Selectmen. Completion of the widening of Leonard Street, as well as any other required infrastructure, must be completed prior to approval of any building permits. We'd like to suggest that, all that utility infrastructure in Leonard Street widening is a significant project, as well as the construction. Our anticipated build-out is Building 5. We'd like to suggest that prior to any occupancy, You know, the intersection is upgraded, the utilities are in, Leonard Street's widening, but we'd like to be able to start other construction on the site prior to Leonard being 100% widened. You know, we need to be able to work hand in hand with that process versus all this utility infrastructure and upgrade. I think you saw on Jeff's spreadsheet early on, it's like almost $3 million worth of infrastructure work. We need to be able to begin, assuming we have all the permits, we need to be able to begin work on.
And it's a time delay. It's a major time delay to have that. We can't start until all that's done. Because we have 10 to 12 months of construction for each building, so then we're out already another year and a half, almost to 2 years.
You know, obviously, we can't fill the building if we don't have a sewer
Right.
line. So, you know, we just would like it to be more based on an occupancy permit versus a building permit. I think that even the building inspector could probably agree with that, but, and there was one other thing. There's been noted a couple times about irrigation. We, what I plan to do, we do anticipate some irrigation for the properties. And town of Norton, you cannot connect irrigation to domestic water, so therefore you need a ground water well. What I plan to do, and it can be reviewed after, is to identify exactly the areas we'd propose to irrigate, and I believe we can even calculate, you know, how much water that takes on the landscape plan for further review. But we do, there's areas, just main entrances, and, you know, small areas we do anticipate to irrigate, but we will provide as much information as we can to support that, and just ask that they get the review of that, you know, there's areas of these properties that they need to look good, but again, you know, around backs, you know, we're not gonna, it doesn't need to be pristine everywhere. There's just entrance and focal points that we do plan to irrigate, but we'll provide that information on the landscape plan. We can itemize each exact area and the square footages, and I believe we can even provide estimated usage of the water. What we can't do is, you know, they don't know how much a well can produce until it's in. You know, there's some minor details that we can't provide at this point, but we'll do the best we can to make the board comfortable that the amount of irrigation is realistic to the project. You know, we're going to irrigate 2 acres. We're not going to irrigate 35 acres of grass. You know, you're not going to continue to see that beautiful golf course. You know, see small lawn areas, and that's it. But I think that's all I wanted to touch base on.
All right.
Does it make sense to bring in the building inspector who's here at this point, or?
Yeah, I know we have a couple other representatives from the town here, so certainly, gentlemen, if there's any other comments, thoughts that you want to share this evening.
From the building department's perspective, if Mr. gives stepped or phased approval, the building department wouldn't have a problem doing the phased approval with the contingency that the certificate of occupancy would be also signed up by the planning department.
All right. Any other, yep, go ahead, sir.
I would, Ron Kimball, 51 Pine Street. I would add that on the actual road layout, it's not an issue as far as the Board of Selectmen is concerned. We understand the build out and how it has to work. There are 2 concerns that we're probably going to have to address, the Board of Selectmen and Road Commission will have to address. One is what's left of Leonard Street after your industrial park is completed. Designing that intersection so it will be designed in a way that trucks cannot go down that street. Design it so that the curves are to an angle where if a truck even looked at it, they know they can't make it. Discourage any traffic going down London. As road commissioners, we're allowed in state law to restrict traffic on truck traffic on roads within the town of Norton. One in Birch Street, or 2 streets we can review, determine whether or not we want to put up no truck signs. I live on Pine Street, we have a no truck sign on Pine Street, it doesn't work, but at least it's there. But we can only hope that, you know, if we design it in a certain way, it'll discourage anyone at the far end of that industrial park not to go down, at least down Leonard Street at this point. As far as Birch Street goes, I'll talk to the town manager and the public safety officials and ask them what their concern might be about Burt. Other than that, there really aren't any other streets in that area we can deal with. They do not go into other municipalities, so we can't deal with Newman Street, we can't deal with, you know, maybe Home Street is one we probably will have to put no truck signs on, that's still within the borders of Norton, but something we'll look at. We'll probably talk about in the very near future, but I'm very encouraged that they're getting there finally, and this project is finally getting off the road, off the ground. There will be a lot of improvements down on 495 and 123 East Main. Complement what you talked about, Paul, earlier, it's actually on one side, it's on the sidewalk. So putting it on both sides is going to help anyway. But even future development in that area, in the future, widening that whole street will become a priority for the town in Mass Highway. But right now, we're concentrating on the section between Pine Street and where I am, and Pine Street and 495. And in 2019, the traffic lights will be installed at the bridge. And the plan is to come backwards. So it's all going to be, even though they're putting traffic lights at the bottom of the hill, we have agreed with Mass Highway that they will build the lights first, then come back toward Pine Street to make it more friendly and feasible. Because we know the major construction on that bridge is going to take a lot of time. We're going to make sure that that's done properly. But overall, I think the project looks pretty good, and I think they put a lot of work into it. All of you have done a great job of making it happen. Good luck with the conservation side of it. But I think, for the most part, you guys are doing a great job.
All right, thank you for the comments. I'll open it up just to any folks in the crowd here that have any other comments to share before we, you know, kind of wrap up and close the public hearing piece. So by all means, feel free if anyone wants to make any other additional comments. Okay, thank you. Orin, yeah.
I don't know that, in absence of the revised plans, we want to close the public hearing at this point? That we have the.
Well, I mean, we'll continue,
Oh,
you know,
okay.
yeah, continue, but obviously we'll close it for this, purposes of this meeting, continue on to our next scheduled meeting, yes.
I have a question. There's a great deal of material, and it's a lot to go through. But, and I don't know, is there a way that we can make this available to the public, either through the applicants or through something we could provide? Just because sitting here in absence of seeing a lot of this material really doesn't give them any insight as to what's going on. And I would like the opportunity to just make sure that material is available to them.
Philboat Town Hall, right?
We have there's a www.condyne.com/Norton Business Park. We have a name change in between, but that has the MEPA information, and we can just populate a new section with documents that have been submitted that are basically public record at this point. We just can continue to populate that website if that helps.
That's perfect.
The PDF documents. So
Yeah,
everybody
that's
can
helpful.
open
You know, my one concern would be as we get revisions and alterations that it doesn't get too confusing, you know? So obviously, but anything that's been submitted as, throughout the course of this process, that's public record, you know, by all means, you know. The ability to share that is
like,
appreciated.
if we have some back and forth between consultants, you know, we're not gonna.
Yeah.
It's once
yeah.
we put a new date, revision 2,
Uh-huh.
you know, send it into Paul, you know, that's when,
Right.
and even if it gets presented at a meeting, you know, that's when it'll
Mhm.
populate. We can do that.
Thank you.
Anything submitted is available if somebody comes to the planning office upstairs.
Right, all of that's available. And if people even email, I could send the Dropbox link. I'm going to see if we can even use the Dropbox link on our website. I'm not sure we can, but we're going to try.
Can we create, because there may be stuff that's planning board sensitive, as opposed to the stuff that might be for a particular project, that you can put into a Dropbox and say, you can contact.
I think that's his, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
If they can do that, then we at least make that available to them to look at it, the same way we're looking at material.
Right, right.
Just going through your files, it's not easy.
No, it isn't. But it's all of that's public information, and it's all available to people, to anybody.
All right, very good. Obviously, a lot of information, to your point. A lot of work has been done by a lot of folks, so thank the folks that joined us tonight for what's been done and the ongoing efforts going forward. Without saying, it's a huge project with a lot of implications and factors that affect many things. So a lot of work will continue on this, and we appreciate the folks that joined us tonight here to be a part of that, just to hear what's happening and learn a little bit about what's being proposed and plan going forward. So thanks to those who joined us here tonight, and as well as watching on TV as well. So
We need a motion to continue.
yeah, I'll certainly entertain a motion to continue to our next meeting. It is on the 27th. We do have our next scheduled meeting, right? So I'll assume you guys will be available to continue the process.
So moved.
Seconded.
All right, moved and seconded to continue Blue Star on to our next meeting on November 27th, Tuesday at 7, we'll call it 7:20, to recontinue. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstentions, none? Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, thank you all. Members of the board, any other information to present, share, discuss? Tim?
Move to adjourn?
Right, before that, Paul, anything else
No,
from
sir.
Aaron to share with us? All right. All right.
I
Moved,
second that.
seconded. All in favor of adjourning at, I have 9:57 this evening? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Nay. All right.